I'm here with Peter Williams, and we're talking about apologetics for a little bit. And one of the things that I often get asked is by people kind of getting into apologetics is, what type of an apologist are you? Are you a presuppositionalist or are you an evidentialist? And I often don't really like the question. I wonder what you think about that question. Maybe if you've described your own kind of apologetic style as well.
Well, I think that we all want to use evidence, and we're all aware that people can have different presuppositions, and so there's a real place for both emphases. But what I find is that you've also got to think about who you are, what skills you have. If you're a philosopher, you're probably going to make a really good presuppositional apologist, because you can constantly identify the presuppositions that people have, you can point them out, and you can show how those are leading to false conclusions. However, if you happen to be trained, let's say as an archaeologist or as an ancient historian, or something that more fits the sort of things that people call facts, whether or not that's a helpful term, but that sort of emphasis, then probably for you to spend all of your time talking about philosophy is not going to be very good. So I think to win someone over, you need to be talking about things that you've actually studied, you actually know about, and you share what it is to be a Christian from the perspective of those skills. So I think I would start with thinking about what your skill set, your knowledge base is, and then building your apologetic style around that, because there are a whole number of things that can testify to Christ.
Yeah. So you're saying that there's evidence for both in the Bible? Or you seem to be saying that it's partly style, interest, rather than maybe a biblical case for one over the other.
I think that some of the strong forms of presuppositionalism, which actually deny that a direct appeal to a piece of evidence and saying, and now you have to you have to respond to that evidence, that's unhelpful. Now, it can be the case that some forms of evidentialism say, here is the evidence, you are the jury, and that unfortunately enthrones humans and makes them feel that they're really looking down on God, and they're allowed to decide whether God's guilty or innocent, or whether the Bible happened, and so on. That's unhelpful, but part of it is to do with consistent emphasis. So, for instance, Jesus in John's Gospel will say how he receives testimony from John the Baptist, and who is, of course, infinitely inferior to Jesus himself. But he does that as an accommodation to people. So I think that it's possible to say it's legitimate to appeal to evidence and to ask a human to make up their mind about that evidence as an accommodation. But if you're constantly doing that all of the time, of course, you are feeding them with the idea that they are in charge, and that somehow God is in the dock, and that's completely unhelpful. You mustn't let that happen. But that doesn't mean you can't occasionally do that. So I do tend to mix and match, because I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to win people over. God has given us evidence which may be used. God's given us the ability to also show how the thoughts of humans are often based on completely wrong presuppositions, and we need to expose that. Yeah. So I do think that there is validity in more than one approach, and I think you've got to feed into the question of your own skills. So even if you are trained in history and not in philosophy, if you just constantly emphasize evidence as if it's self-explanatory, as if there is no twisted part of the human mind which actually is wanting to go away from God, then of course you are sending the wrong message ultimately. But that doesn't mean that in a short conversation it's not a good thing to share some evidence, and often you find doing that you'll really pique someone's interest.
Yeah, very good. And I know one of the angles you come at this from is biblical studies. So in the next segment, stay with us, and we're going to ask him how biblical studies actually aid in the task of apologetics.